The proceeding will start shortly.
Order, order. The committee is now in session. This is the second session of the committee's inquiry into astronomy. We're looking today at the commercialisation of UK astronomy technology, its role in enabling UK participation in international programmes, and its potential to be repurposed for other uses. And our first panel today, we have Professor Gillian Wright, who is the Director of the UK Astronomy Technology Centre, who's joining us virtually, so welcome, Professor Wright. And we have Dr. Geraint Morgan, who is member of the Faculty of Science, Technology, Engineering and Mathematics School of Physical Sciences at the Open University. So welcome, Dr. Morgan. Dr. Morgan, can I start with you and just ask you briefly, can you introduce yourself, say a few words about what it is you do and the importance of UK astronomy?
Okay, so I'm a research fellow at the Open University, as you just said. My background is as an analytical chemist. I spent the first half of my career working with Professor Colin Pillinger, developing instrumentation for the Rosetta and Beagle 2 space missions, so based around mass spectrometry. For the last 15 years or so, I've been looking at how we can commercialize and find other applications for those, for the expertise as well as the technology we develop for those missions. So in particular, we have developed a prototype air monitoring system, which is now being used on UK submarines to measure air quality. We've developed a range of different analytical methodologies for food, particularly whiskey and other kind of systems, so to protect the whiskey brands. And we've also about to translate our valve technology from the Rosetta mission. Hopefully next Thursday we will sign a licensing agreement with a multinational satellite propulsion company to then exploit that for future satellite production.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morgan, and no doubt we'll hear more about the whiskey later on. Subject of great interest, possibly not at 9:30 in the morning. Professor Wright, if I could turn to you and ask, how's the UK Astronomy Technology Centre ensuring that the UK is able to compete for contracts in international missions and programmes?
So the UK Astronomy Technology Centre is one of 50 national laboratories, and our role is to be a centre of expertise in the construction of astronomy instrumentation. So we provide an in-depth set of skills, knowledge, experience in how you design and build these astronomy instruments that ranges from the science requirements all the way through to putting them together and testing them in our laboratory facilities. And that is a key part of the sort of wider astronomy ecosystem in the UK, because how the astronomy is done is part of how the instruments are designed. And what we're doing is we're putting the two together, enabling UK scientists to get into leadership positions. But obviously that also means that what we're doing is enabling industry in the UK to be part of constructing these activities. And certainly that role sits not just with the UKTC, but also more broadly in the Science and Technologies Facilities Council. But we're kind of the astronomy spearhead for it.
Thank you. I mean, you've mentioned industry. How do you support industry in terms of access, training, skills, these kind of areas?
There's multiple ways that happens. I mean, in our supplier chain, often we find that because what we're looking for is sort of pushing the envelope a little bit of what companies can do. We're upskilling the companies by working with them. We have industry liaison officers, not at the UKTC, but in STFC, who have active roles of when big contracts are coming up, getting out in the community, in the industry community, organising days for the industry to come and meet and discuss the requirements, build their understanding. There are also more explicit training schemes that are run by STFC's Business Innovations Directorate, where again, they're building the links with the companies and then through that, bringing them in.
Thank you. And in terms of the projects that you support, what's the rough split between private and public funding for these activities? So
the astronomy instruments are public funded. They are for the science, so they're part of the astronomy funding in the UK. But some of the other activities are mixed private public funding. So if I looked at the Higgs Centre for Innovation, for example, and how the business incubation works, probably around somewhere between a third and a half of the funding those companies receive is government funding, but then that's leveraging the funding, the private investment in those companies.
And in that innovation centre, I mean, is it the case that a company will come and say, we have this problem and we need your help to solve it and we'll provide this money to do it? Is that the kind of model?
It's the STFC Business Incubation Scheme, of which the Higgs Centre for Innovation is the one in Edinburgh. They also have Daresbury and the Rutherford Appleton sites. It's competitive. The companies have to have a business idea. So these are often small spin-out companies from different areas of physics. They get business support, so they're helped to grow quickly in terms of learning business. The Business Innovations Directorate helps them to make connections with the private investment into their companies. The ones that are on site here often benefit from indeed technical discussions with our skills and expertise around how to do things. So yes, helping them to solve problems, and also with academics from the University of Edinburgh, if say the company's actually working in the software area.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn to my colleagues now, starting with Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Professor Wright. Professor Wright, we talk on this committee about collaborations, and I'm just wondering, what role does the UK Astronomy Technology Centre, what role does it play in regard to collaborations, whether that be SME, the wider industry?
And also internationally. So all of the work we do is part of very large international collaborations. It is all collaborative in that sense. Within a particular part of astronomy instrumentation, we might have a lead on a work package or a particular technical area that's then collaborating with institutes all around Europe or all around the world, depending on the project. And then we would bring industry into those collaborations, either through direct procurement or through working alongside the industry. If I was to use some of the software we're developing for the square kilometre array as an example, then our software engineers here have the key role in designing the architect of the software, so how it's going to work for astronomy, whereas the companies are more involved in actually developing and delivering the software modules to the square kilometre array observatory as it is being built.
So does that mean that what you do is unique? So, and it's well known? It's like universally understood?
Yeah, we're extremely well known internationally and among the UK university community of astronomers.
Right. And what is the size of the astronomy sector in regards to jobs and inward investment, etc.?
I wouldn't be the right person to ask that question of, actually, I think.
Right. Okay.
I mean, because it's a massive, it's a massive number of grants to universities. There are 40, somewhere on the order of 40 universities in the UK have active astronomy groups. And I'm sorry, I don't have the top level number of the grant funding to all those universities.
That's all right, no problem. And do you think that you need more money? I mean, we ask that to everyone. No one ever says no to this question.
No,
do you think, no money, do you think that it's good value for money? What are your thoughts around all of that?
I think what the astronomy community achieves in the UK is very good value for money. And I think if you look at the things like the citation indices of the research that is done, of its international standing, those things are indicating that for the level of funding, what happens in the UK is a really high achievement rate in terms of the scientific impact of everybody. Everybody's what the whole community. We are a part of that ecosystem. I know there's always pressure on budgets, and there is always ambition from the astronomy community to do more. We do have big leadership roles in international astronomy endeavours, and with more funding, we could clearly do more of that. I think we could also do some of the relationships with industry a little bit more strongly, especially in the early phases of technology development, where being able to co-develop with industry might enhance, if you like, the involvement of industry.
Thank you very much.
Yes, of course, we can do more with more funding, and there is a lot more to do.
Great, thank you, Professor Wright. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dawn. And if I could turn now to Dr. James Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Professor Wright, thank you again for joining us this morning. What success has the UK Astronomy Technology Centre had in supporting work to repurpose astronomy technology for other sectors?
So if I look at, if I was to take the Higgs Centre for Innovation, which is more subtle than repurposing technology, because it is about the access they get to expertise. The companies that come into the business incubation there, they typically start as 2-person spin-out type companies. By the time they leave, they've built their workforce to 10 people, so they're creating real jobs and things for which there is a real market. There's about a greater than 90% success rate of the companies that come into the Business Incubation Centre. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that, much as I think we're going to hear from my colleague at the Open University, we at the UKTC have a small part of our programme that is about actively applying our skills and expertise in real multidisciplinary research. One example would be a retinal densitometer. So it measures changes in your eye that are related to the early onset of eye disease. That's a project that was really led from the University of Cardiff. We worked with opticians and medical scientists at the University of Cardiff. That's in medical trials in Cardiff now. So I think it's an example of a successful use of that technology. STFC has a £4 million a year grant funding scheme that's explicitly aimed at taking the technologies that are developed for astronomy, but also particle physics or nuclear physics. So our big science program, and looking at applications of that. Examples are things like how you categorize and count stars and study stars is not very dissimilar to, for example, monitoring populations of endangered species from satellite images. So there's a very successful project around that. There's another one that's around tree cover that's led to very long-term multidisciplinary collaborations. There are people at the University of Cambridge that are looking at medical applications of some astronomy software using those skills to build virtual reality cancer tumors that are useful for cancer research. So there's a very wide range of applications of these technologies, and it is happening. There's a lot of real multidisciplinary research that comes from the astronomy program.
That's very interesting to hear. So clearly many applications. Is there potential for more? And in terms of jobs and economic benefit for the country as a whole, what do you think could be realised?
So there is potential for more, and certainly there's a lot of overlap. For example, between astronomy and the environmental sciences. I mean, in simple terms, studying the atmospheres of other planetary bodies is not so dissimilar to turning the problem the other way and looking at our own atmosphere. That's an area where I think there could be a lot of growth, and astronomy is already contributing, but that could grow.
Thank you. Dr. Morgan, do you have any perspectives on the use of astronomy technology in other sectors?
Yeah, so my background is actually planetary sciences, which is a small part of that. So we develop miniature analytical systems. As I mentioned before, we were engaged by the MOD and BAE Systems. We developed the air monitoring system, which is now on UK submarines. That's broken a 30-year US monopoly on the supply of that, generated 13 jobs in an SME up in Yorkshire. They've signed a very large contract with the MOD to supply those and continuously through. I think the same as Professor Wright, a lot of the investment goes into the people who design the instrumentation and the missions. And I have found it much easier to sell solutions to people's problems with the multidisciplinary teams you require for space instrumentation. You need engineers, you need chemists, you need physicists, you need a whole range of different expertise, as well as the geologists, the microbiologists, and what have you. And really, the opportunities are just as big as anyone wants to make them.
Yes.
So, for instance, we're now working with a multinational car company using our sniffing technology to make sure their cars are meeting regulations and to also help them reduce costs.
Yep.
As I mentioned at the beginning, we are helping the whiskey industry.
Yes.
So we are capable of identifying more compounds in complex samples. Whiskey is very complex, as are other distilled spirits. And in collaboration with commercial companies, we're able to apply new tools to help answer questions. How long should you leave a whiskey in an oak barrel for? What happens to the chemistry? What happens if you change the recipe? What happens if you change the process? So there's a whole range of different applications.
Maybe a separate inquiry into that.
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Davis, but could I ask specifically about the whiskey? I may have an interest. There's a huge industry around whiskey tasting, whiskey distilling, trying to get the perfect blend. Can you see that this technology would replace the role of your traditional...
The one pushback I do tend to have is from the master distillers, because of course they are the experts in that, but they're not really scalable. You can't... these people are very, very skilled. They are very skilled. Our machines can prove that they are very good at their jobs. But, there's a massive growing industry now for whiskey. By the end of this year, there'll be £1 billion worth of whiskey in barrels in England. There are 50 distilleries in England making whiskey now. So we've just been funded to work with the English Whiskey Guild, the trade organisation for the new sector, to basically help them characterise. We've previously helped the Welsh whiskey industry in the Welsh Wind. We're helping them.
Would it also, it's also about detecting fakes.
Yeah, so basically we're able to fingerprint each whiskey. So each whiskey, because you have different ingredients and different processes, will have a unique signature. And there's something like 500 compounds that we're all smelling when we smell whiskey. Each one of those is different. But using our tools, we can look at characterize, and then using the software, machine learning effectively, or AI, I suppose people call it these days, but be able to then train the system to look for fakes and adulterated species as well. So.
Thank you. Sorry, Dr. Davis.
One final question to Professor Wright, if that's okay, and that is, what lessons can you learn from analogous organisations in other countries, so organisations that do what you do in other countries?
So I think it's around funding of early stage things before they become very real. So there's a lot of discussion in the astronomy community at the moment around what will be the successor for the James Webb Space Telescope, the next big NASA flagship mission, which will be looking for biosignatures in the atmospheres of planets around other stars. That mission is just in the very early stages of both the discussions amongst the astronomers about what does it really need to do, but also the beginnings of technology development studies for the new technologies that will be able to drive that mission forward. And if I look in countries like France and Italy, they're already very organized in terms of technology development studies, in ways that while we're having some very high profile scientific input to the discussions of the missions and the science is funded, the technology development is maybe not. The very early phases is something that where the funding is quite hard to find in the UK at the moment, because it's not yet a real mission.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, James. Just on that, can I ask us, if the money were there, would there be the capacity and capability to replicate what's been done in Italy here in the UK?
Yes, I think that there would. There are a number of highly skilled astronomy groups around the UK who are interested in developing some of the technologies. There are other technologies that might be well suited in the UK that are not yet being looked at in Europe. So there are opportunities to, jump on board and start doing something. But you have to recognise that these are very, very, the development of a mission like this it's a 30-year programme. So if you start earlier, it becomes a 32, 35-year programme. But the payoff later on is bigger technical roles in some of these things for our industry.
Thank you. I'm going to turn now to Chris Clarkson.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Morgan, sticking with the commercialisation aspect of this, how supportive is the UK government and the wider R&D environment for university spin-outs in this sector?
I can't talk about spin-outs from my own personal experience, but certainly I've had startup companies that have gone through the similar process, and I've actually found it quite supportive, actually. And we do have a very good ecosystem within the space sector. I think, as Gillian has previously mentioned, we are pretty joined up in terms of UKSA, STFC, including the European Space Agency, the ESA Business Incubation Centres. I've had two companies go through the ESA BIC, and as Professor Wright says, one of the biggest thing, apart from the money, was the training and the networking. As an academic, you don't think like a business person, and you've got to kind of retune your mind. But actually, ironically, it's now helping me in my day job, because I'm able to attract commercial funding for research and take the research forward. And as I say, the other thing that was beneficial was the networking, access to funding, as Professor Wright said. There's also the Space Knowledge Transfer Network, which again ties you in not only with other research groups but also other companies. So I would say it's pretty joined up.
So broadly speaking, positive experience. But is there anything in particular you would change or you'd like to see finessed?
I think the issue for most startups comes when you've gone through that incubation process, and I think the incubation process in the UK, including at Edinburgh, Harwell, Daresbury, and also Space Park Leicester nowadays, is excellent. And the ESA Business Incubation Centres, which is run by STFC, are probably, well, they're one of the first in Europe, and they're probably the best and most successful. The problem comes is, where do you go next? And that kind of so-called dip in the innovation curve, that tends to be the difficulty. When I was lucky, when I went through the process, then Innovate UK had something called a space launchpad, which allowed you to have that secondary follow-on funding to let you take it a bit further forward. Unfortunately, that no longer happens, and perhaps that's something others may like to look at, because once you get into the venture capital kind of arena, especially with space projects, which tend to be quite technical and long lead times, they tend to want your arm and your legs. So by the time you get to the point of getting a financial return, your equity's been diminished.
So sticking with that, I mean, you're right, it's a very esoteric sector. What specific support do startups and spin-outs get with bidding for international contracts and exporting this technology? Because I think one thing we're very good at this country is innovating. What we're very bad at is actually then sort of turning that into commercial results. Yeah,
that's an interesting one. I've been going through that process myself with this valve capability. So we've had the situation is the IP is owned by the Open University, but we my company, which is a startup, licensed the IP for the manufacturing license. And that was important because the university doesn't manufacture valves, but it has the IP. And of course, customers want to try before they buy. And so our customers international. And actually for our company, we've got to the point now, we've provided test valves for them and shipped them, and then they're very happy with the results. They now want to have their own license directly from the university, cut out the middleman, which is fine because as an inventor at the university, I also get a share of the revenue and the royalties from that, so that's fine without doing any work. But I do think it's got a bit harder since Brexit because of things to do with export control, particularly with satellites being potentially dual use, and therefore it gets a bit complicated. So for us as a small company, we were approached about providing some more of these valves technologies, but for us it was going to be too difficult. So I think it's definitely a concern for smaller companies who don't have the resources to be able to navigate that field. I think you're right, it's a new area that needs to be supported.
So would you say that the government could do more in this sector? Yes. Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to ask?
Can I just say also, so just in terms of the trying to find out if our valve fitted under dual purpose or not, the websites were not very helpful.
No. Thank you. Professor Wright, is there anything you'd like to add to that at all?
No, I think that's a really good summary of the overall situation, and it's kind of what we've seen some of the companies in our business incubator go through as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Before I come to Tracy, I think Catherine had
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification. So you've invented this amazing whizzy thing, and the IP is owned by the Open University. You've set a firm up to try and find commercial customers. The commercial customers love it. And then they want to go back to the university to simplify the contractual chain. Did you have to set the business up to allow that to happen? As in, did you have to set up the spin-out? Can you explain why?
So it's not a spin-out. So just to be very clear. So the university does not have a stake in the company.
Yeah.
However, we'd had the patent for 9 years and nothing was happening. So I decided, and we had an approach from a NASA project. NASA do not invest in universities for technology. Other international universities, it would have to have gone through a company. You have to have a DUNS number and all this kind of stuff. So yes, so to be able, and again, there's a difference between having the intellectual property and having a product.
Agree.
So you have to. Sorry.
No. So the formation of a P&L run vehicle is essential in getting that technology to the market, even if that doesn't necessarily result in that business then owning and growing.
In our case, because it was a win-win either way.
Yeah.
And actually, we'd make more money if we did it ourselves through the company. However, inevitably, a company is going to want to go to the owners of the IP to reduce costs, inevitably. But because the university actually incentivizes us to, in terms of we get a share of the royalties, it was a no-brainer for us because we can carry on doing our job and hopefully have income.
Do you think there's any argument at all that suggests that I can completely understand why you want to go back to your day job? Is there any argument at all that suggests that the university could have kept the company or found a different way of keeping the company to maximise the revenue coming back? I understand why you've made that decision, but you see what I mean? If you're going to make more money out of the company.
Well, no, the reason the university, so the Open University is a distance learning university, it has 200,000 students. Its business is teaching. So, there's a risk to be involved with a startup. We all know, startups as a whole, and not, there's a very high attrition rate. So there's a reputational risk for universities to be involved with startups.
Yeah, fair. I'm just trying to understand how we can maximise the commercial potential of your genius for UK PLC rather than any individual involved. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tracy Crouch.
I just wanted to follow up a question actually that my colleague asked to Professor Wright around learning from other countries, and in particular sort of kind of the repurposing of technology. Are there any lessons that we can take from?
Well, I think so. The European Space Agency business incubation centres in 22 countries around Europe. Apparently, it's the biggest incubation network in the whole of Europe. So space leads in that area. And the UK has been there. I've got some figures actually, if you'd like, for the ESA-BIC. So it's been operating for 13 years. I think Edinburgh's been operating for 5 or 6 now as part of that process. There's over 130 companies have been supported through the scheme. Those companies have raised £250 million worth of private investment. Those companies contribute 50 million gross value added contribution to the UK economy per year. There's 1,000 FTE people staff in the incubatee and alumni companies, and the lifetime cost for that program is 10 million. So it's a 25-to-1 kind of return. And I think I saw a number on the website, 86% of those companies are still live, which is a very high ratio. And as I say, partly that is because of the support and training that those entrepreneurs get from the ESA-BIC. And the UK ESA-BIC is the most successful of all the ESA-BICs.
Amazing. Can I just ask a quick question for you, out of curiosity? I'll come to you in a second, Professor Wright, sorry. Just wanted to ask Dr. Morgan out of curiosity. Our briefing notes that your commercial projects have characterised the volatile profiles of bed bugs, avocados, chicken sheds, bagged salads, car interiors, and even urine samples. I'm really interested at how you came to the sort of kind of the thought process of here's this amazing technology on astronomy, how I can now apply it to bed bugs.
Actually, Bedbugs was one of my ESA-BIC companies.
Right.
So, ironically, I was put in touch with my business partner through Paul Vernon, who was the head of ESA-BIC at the time, because, as we know, there's problems in bedbugs in Paris currently, and in London as well. And so he was a pest controller, and he said he could smell bedbugs. He could know if he walked into a room, he could smell them. So I build machines that sniff things.
Wow, amazing.
So the difficulty was, so our strap line was, we find them before they find you.
Oh my God.
That's commercial training paid off.
Unfortunately,
Busters.
Elementary language.
Microphones didn't pick that up.
So go on,
unfortunately, the hotels, because again, if you've got to test each hotel room, you've got 1,000 hotel rooms, and you've got 365 days in a year. The airport hotel, people are turning over every day. It gets quite expensive. So they're only willing.
How do you then get that into a commercial product? What's
I think this is where we struggled. Then is we could develop it. We developed a solution. So we worked with a guy who grows bed bugs. So we were able to characterise the chemistry and understand how they communicate. The issue became one of the market wasn't willing to pay the cost.
Okay.
Forgive me, just to follow up. So basically, your technology couldn't just be left in a room for 10 minutes. It needed to have some. And it's the size of a box, so it's got a big price tag on it.
But it wouldn't even, 10 minutes would be more than enough. But it's the cost of
Producing the cleverness.
Producing in the first place. They want to spend pennies.
Sorry, right, you put your hand up and I may have completely ruined your point by going down a different route, but please, if you wanted to return to the question.
Oh, I wanted to just follow up the comments about the ESA business incubation, because what STFC is doing is I think, a learning from that. STFC business incubation is not just the ESA business incubation. So the requirements for ESA business incubation are that the business has to have some connection to space or a space technology. What STFC is looking at, though, is a much broader, I would say, physics-based connection. And if you looked at the companies in the Higgs Centre for Innovation, and you asked what the common theme was there, it's closer to robotics than it is to space or software. So I think we are learning from these things, and that's part of the STFC business incubation environment. It's a bit broader.
Thank you, Tracy. And I think finally, Stephen Metcalf.
Thank you very much. You, Dr. Morgan, you mentioned Brexit and how that had potentially made it more difficult to export, presumably therefore into Europe. But your dealings with NASA remain unchanged, or have they become more complicated as well through unforeseen consequences?
I think they've stayed the same, but I have limited interactions with NASA. Okay,
so as you mentioned NASA, right, but it's been limited. Okay, fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I thank our two panellists, Dr. Morgan and Professor Wright. I don't think any of us expected to be talking about both whisky and bed bugs when we were looking at astronomy, but really thank you for your contributions, and we'll now welcome our next panellists to come forward. Thank you. Just for the to speed things slightly, I'll start introducing. We have in our second panel we have Adam Woodcraft, who is deals with research and operations at QMC Instruments. So welcome, Mr. Woodcraft, and Justin Byrne, who is the head of Earth Observation and Science at Airbus Defence and Space. Welcome to both of you. If I could turn to Mr. Woodcraft to start with. How successful are UK companies such as QMC in winning contracts for astronomical instrumentation to be placed on international missions and programmes?
I'll start with a caveat that I don't have the broad view that many of your witnesses have had, so I just know the fairly niche area of astronomy I work in, and certainly in that area there is very little scope for industrial contracts for the specific astronomy aspects. These are normally done as international collaborations with universities and government labs bringing their own funding. So we certainly have had some large contracts for astronomy, but they're few and far between.
Thank you. And turning to Mr. Byrne, how does Airbus interact with international missions when we're considering astronomical instruments?
The astronomy missions tend to be worldwide anyway, because they are trying to do something that's never been done before. So quite often it's either ESA, NASA, or quite often together. So they set the science goal, the science and academic teams, and assess those goals to see if are they really world leading, are they really going to make a breakthrough? And then the industry's job is then to assess it, are they feasible? You know, we look at how could they be built, how much would they cost? And then we bid. I mean, it's a competitive environment. We're bidding against other countries in Europe. We're bidding against the Americans. We're often collaborating, so it's a mixed model. And for the UK to be successful, we need strong skills, we need the strong academic links, which we have. We need access to the cutting-edge technologies, because the astronomy missions always push it a bit beyond that. and we need to be access to the global supply chain as well. And our heritage really in the UK is doing some amazing missions. We spoke to Professor Wright before, and we did the James Webb Space Telescope with her, Solar Orbiter, other missions. So I think we have demonstrated that we are world class in astronomy in the UK.
Thank you. And the Airbus, we wouldn't naturally associate Airbus with Earth observation. How big a sector is that within Airbus itself?
Within the UK, we have 12,000 people working in Airbus, and space is about 25% of that. So it's a big element. I mean, you have to recognise that the global space market is forecast to double by 2030. There's an enormous, 1/4 of the world's telecommunication spacecraft are built in the UK. And in the science and exploration and astronomy arena, we're world class in the UK as well. Okay, so 25%. So we're talking about several hundred, 300 odd people. Sorry, what was the figure you said you have? 12,000.
12,000. Oh, so it's 3,000.
We have 12,000 direct employees in the UK.
Yep.
And then we have around 79,000 indirect employees, people that work on Airbus projects in the UK.
So from public's point of view, sometimes there's a difficulty with linking what happens in subjects like astronomy to their everyday experience and lives, and there is sometimes a disconnect or perceived disconnection between these. How big an issue is, or how big a subject matter is Earth observation for Airbus just now?
I mean, we operate Earth observation spacecraft all over the planet. We're exporting that globally. We're doing both science and dual use and many applications. But if you look at the fundamental technology in astronomy, telescopes looking out to space, it's actually very similar to the telescopes looking down on the Earth. So a lot of the investment we do in astronomy pushes that technology forward, and then we repurpose it for Earth observation, we repurpose it for some of our telecommunication satellites, even our military satellites. There's a lot of commonality, common themes, common technologies, so investing in one actually benefits the other, and obviously we're here to grow the economy, grow jobs, and we spin all of those technologies across all of our sectors to maximise their benefit.
Thank you very much, and I'm going to turn to my colleagues now, starting with Catherine Fletcher.
Gentlemen, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it. Mr. Woodcraft, what's your experience, apart from being super clever and generating a really interesting business? No, but what's it like, the links between academia and industry? And what can we do to make sure that the links stay strong to help this commercialisation of pure research?
It's a good question. Again, I actually have to say I wouldn't claim to have any kind of broad overview. From my experience, our company has very strong links. We came out of the university group, we're still embedded in the group. We work with them every day, help each other out, and that's the best way you can have a connection with a group, is by essentially being part of it. I know there are lots of very good schemes around to get things going. The STFC has its industrial partnership scheme, which I was on the panel for, and it was a privilege because it actually had enough money to fund everything that was worth funding, which is not common in STFC. And we saw a huge variety of different amazing ideas, things you could do with astronomy. I don't know what came of any of them, but we funded some very interesting looking things. And also, again, this is just what I've personally come across. The Royal Society of Edinburgh have enterprise fellowships. Anecdotally, I know someone who had one, and that was very good in terms of taking an academic and teaching them what they needed to make their spin out that then stays.
Is it separate from the ESA BIC that we've just heard about? Yeah.
So I certainly know there seems some very good schemes for getting this link going, but as for how these proceed, I couldn't tell you.
What was the best one you heard?
There was one. It was to make solar ovens for less developed countries. It was something totally wacky, and it was something that was going to be really cheap and help people cook food. And I forget now how. It's not just astronomy. There's this panels for anything STFC funds. Yeah. I forget what it came out of, but it was effectively
concentration of the beam of energy.
So it was cheap.
Yeah.
And why that went, I don't know, but it was really interesting.
That does sound interesting. So you've touched on it in terms of sort of funding, But what's the support like for the SMEs for competing for the astronomy contracts? You paint a good picture, but I'd love to understand a bit more what that actually looks like practically.
Well, again, I'd say we do very little of our work is actually for astronomy. It's mostly taking what's done for astronomy and putting it in other areas. We bid for contracts. We bid for very large contracts for building a major part of weather satellites. We go down to things where it goes to a bid for, say, less than €100,000.
Yeah.
If there's support out there for this sort of work, I don't know where I find it. We just get on with it.
Oh, fine. So you're not getting lead generation support or bid writing support or...
No, I would say, I mean, in general, writing bids isn't straightforward, but it's generally fairly clear what's needed. And I'll touch on what was mentioned earlier, where we get absolutely no support is export control.
Yeah.
So, as was mentioned, some of this is dual-use technology, and there seems to be no support whatsoever for SMEs. If you want to work out, if you need an export license, it's made very clear you've got to go and look at the legislation, look everything up, figure out for yourself, is it needed or not. You can put in an application for a license and then get a letter eventually saying none needed. And that's the other problem, that the timescales are very large. So typically 3 months. We've recently had to wait 6 months to find out if we can export. Fortunately, we have a unique technology and the customer had to wait.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it could have gone elsewhere. Talking to colleagues in other countries, they have timescales more like a few weeks. There's also a perception that the UK is more zealous in saying no. Now, fully appreciate it's the government's responsibility to decide what we can and can't export, and we have no issue with that. But if we're to get on and make money from the things we can export, it'd be very helpful if we could find that out much more quickly.
Oh, that's very helpful. So just let me... so Department of Business and Trade, they've got a series of regional export support advisors, I understand, and also you've got things like UK Export Finance. They're not featuring in your world to help facilitate the process.
There may be help we're not aware of, but it's never been signposted to us. If you contact the government directly and say, quick query, can I export this? Just get told, work it out yourself.
That's very interesting. Right, okay, thank you, Chair. I mean, maybe it's something we can explore slightly later, because there are a series of things, but it's not getting to you, so that's quite important. Thank you. I mean, your counterparts in other countries, they report shorter timescales. Do they have anything else? Do they have on-the-ground relationships? Do they have increased, people or business connections? Is anyone else in the world doing lead generation for companies such as yours?
I couldn't say.
No, fine. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Catherine. Chris Clarkson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Woodcraft, can I start with you? What efforts are you making to sort of translate some of this technology, this really exciting stuff you're doing, into other commercial applications? And we've heard, some of these things, and we've heard about the ovens, for example. So are you taking specific steps to sort of repurpose some of your things for commercialisation?
This is what we do. So we started in the 70s as a university spin-out doing various things. I think people still use some of our BATS detectors, but the one thing that really took off and we now do exclusively is taking technology designed for submillimeter astronomy, which Steve Eales mentioned in the first session, is something the UK is a world leader at, and finding other applications, and there are many. So some of our sales go to other fields of astronomy, generally doing experiments on the ground, looking at spectrum materials, so when you see one in space, you know what you've actually seen. But it's vast. We cover physics, chemistry, biology, engineering. The products go all over the planet, including to telescopes on the South Pole and into space. I think the furthest we've had anything go is Saturn at the moment.
Is that it?
Yes. Do you get access to adequate funding streams to sort of undertake this research to repurpose things, or is it a case that sort of previous repurposed applications fund the next series? And it's
so the answer to that is yes and no. So in general, our company directly, as you say, we fund our own. Well, partly funded from our own revenue and also from working with the academics, and that's been enough to bring out new products and also change the products. Technology changes, so a big thing is to get the sensitivity. These detectors have to be cooled to a few degrees of absolute zero, And we've moved from having to pour slosh liquid helium around to you buy a cooler that's like a fridge, you plug it into the wall and it gets cold. And that's quite a lot of development there, but that we funded ourselves. The no aspect of it is there's one very interesting application, which is security screening. So you can take these detectors developed for astronomy. And I should say, one of the why fund astronomy and then say I'll get spin-outs rather than something else. And I think a fundamental aspect of astronomy is that astronomers want absolutely the best. They want to get the last few fractions of a percent out of everything they do, and they're highly successful in persuading people to give them the money to do that. I think in some other fields, the impression I get is in Earth observing, they're very interested in data continuity, but not necessarily getting that very, very last bit. So you end up with a lot of money's gone into technology that's superbly sensitive, and which nobody would think to fund for other applications. But once you have it, you can then use it. So this one, the security screening, I'm sure you've all flown, you've gone on these stand like that in a box and everything. We can have a technology where it's entirely passive. You're not putting X-rays on somebody. You're not spraying radiation at them. It's just looking at the fact that everybody emits radiation, and you can just walk along a corridor. So coming into Parliament, you could have a corridor. You walk down it, and someone's looking at the screen, and they can see a phone in their pocket, gun in their pocket, whatever. Now this is potentially big, but it also needs a lot of funding. And we talked about schemes. There's been money, there's both money comes into academia and the schemes industry can apply for. They will fund the proof of concept. And this is being done as a kind of spin-off of a spin-off, a separate company set up by QMC and the university. They have a demonstrator. You can bring potential backers in. They can walk down. They can see how sensitive it is. They can see you sit on a chair and stand up. You can see someone's been sitting there from the heat from it. But it is very, very hard to get that money to take it to a product. The assumption is once you've shown us the product there, the money will appear, and that's not how it's working out.
No. Thank you very much. Speaking of cool things, Mr. Byrne, I had the pleasure of going to your Stevenage site a little while back, and I just want to make sure everybody knows I've driven a Mars rover, because I don't think enough people know I've driven and broken a Mars rover. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton's also broke it, so I assume I've done the right thing there. How important for you as Airbus is the UK as a sort of springboard in terms of your relationship with academia, in terms of being able to access the right people, the right funding? How important is it for Airbus as an entity?
UKSA have been working in partnership with us for many years. We're working on the space strategy with them, the space industrial policy that was announced last week. And that's really helping us create a framework for where does the UK want to be world-class at technology, skills and capability-wise. They're obviously our main vehicle into the European Space Agency and internationally into NASA and other agencies around the world. So we work hand in hand with them. And obviously we go through the business cases, justify the growth in space, the investment that we need in space, and where to focus that, and that's done fully aligned with them.
Do you feel you have adequate connections to other parts of industry, to government, and I'm thinking also about sort of agencies such as the Astronomy Technology Centre?
I mean, if you look at all the missions, especially in astronomy, you can't do astronomy without academia. I mean, they're not only defining the requirements, they actually build key parts of the technology of the missions. So if you take a mission like LISA Pathfinder, which was measuring gravitational waves, I mean, we were trying to measure, create a spacecraft so stable that, an atom thickness of vibration could be detected. I mean, the spacecraft was built by Airbus, but actually if you look at the key technology inside it, the optical interferometer that came from Glasgow University, Birmingham University were building the phase meters, and only actually the complete optimization of that system did we get to the levels that you can actually measure gravitational waves. So it really is a partnership with them. And on the supply chain, we have, I think, 3,900 suppliers in the UK. 50% of those are SMEs. So it's really vital that we're encouraging them, because that's really where the technology, the know-how is coming from as well. So we have to maximise both ends.
It really is an ecosystem. Do you feel the government probably supports that?
They definitely support it from the European Space Agency side. So obviously the money going into the European Space Agency is good. I think the academic side tend to get funded directly, and they have more challenges, I would say. I have a bit more sympathy for the challenges they have. What we would encourage, though, is that actually government is procuring lots of space assets. So we should, now that we have an industrial strategy, we should get all parts of government to implement that strategy. and make sure that we have some sovereign procurement in some critical procurements that are coming up, because that would really develop that technology, skills, capabilities onshore and not offshoring some of those capabilities to other countries.
Thank you. That was the answer I was after.
On the industrial strategy, can I ask, is there a feeling, because you talked about implementing the strategy, is there a feeling that the strategy has been written, devised and has now been put to the side?
No, I mean, it's only just been released last week, but we've been working with them to try and agree on what the themes, what we think should be the focus.
It's just been released, but there have been previous strategies.
Well, the space strategy had to then basically do the top level umbrella, then had to turn into tangibles. Now, what is it? What is the technology we want to be world class in? What are the companies and the SMEs that we want to develop? What's the academic direction of research we want to go in? And that we have that framework now. We now need to make sure that all parts of the government are aligned and implementing that on some of the programs, that big programs that are coming up.
How long will it take us to know whether it's been successful?
Well, if you look at some of the big procurements, we've got the Skynet procurements coming up. This is a multi-billion procurement in
It was
space.
coming up before the strategy. I mean, how long before we know whether the strategy is hitting everything it should be?
I think you just have to look at the procurements that are coming through and checking that those technologies, the investments, the themes. I mean, Airbus invests about 275 million of R&D into the UK each year. We want obviously the government to align that. We are aligning our investment, and it just needs to come together and be focused. But we think that we have the framework now. We just need to get on and implement it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Woodcraft, can I go back to the technology you were describing? I take it was infrared. It's detecting. You talked about detectors that could be used.
It's field I come in, it's sub-millimetre or terahertz. It's somewhere between infrared and radio waves. It's a very niche area, which is why some areas astronomy can benefit from other areas. So in infrared astronomy, there's a lot of military funding, and the first infrared telescopes used essentially military detectors. Sub-millimetre goes the other way. There's very little industrial application, so all the work's being done in astronomy, and now's the potential to spin into other areas.
You sounded slightly frustrated that you're not able to, people are not picking up on this the way they should do. Do you think they're likely to pick up on it in other countries?
I don't know. I know I suspect this is an international problem. It certainly is in the UK, the Valley of Death. There's often funding for proof of concept, and then it's over to commercial funding. It's a good question, I couldn't tell you.
Thank you. If I could turn to Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you very much indeed. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Mr. Byrne, you mentioned that you've got 12,000 direct employees and 79,000 in the wider supply chain. Is that across the whole of Airbus, or is that in the space and astronomy related activities?
That's Airbus in the UK.
Right, that's Airbus in the UK. And how many of those are involved in what might be described as space jobs?
25% of those.
25%
is related to space.
Perfect. And is that a bigger workforce here in the UK than other parts of the world? I mean,
So I run science and astronomy in France and Germany as well. So they tend to have, in complementary to their ESA programs, they have a big national program as well.
Right.
And they have, obviously, on their military programs, they have very strong sovereign requirements that those contracts must be done in country. So they tend to have slightly larger, and they have other elements of space like launchers and that they focus money on. So, but in terms of astronomy, yeah, we're at similar sort of levels to those countries.
Okay, and that number in the UK, the 25%, is that likely to go up? I mean, is this an area that's expanding?
Well, I mean, the growth of the space sector is very impressive. You know, it's expected to double by 2030. So obviously, Airbus is committed to invest in that. We invest 275 million in R&D. We're investing in the skills, the STEM aspects as well, and with the objective of taking these technologies, becoming world leaders, and then exploiting that globally. I mean, we don't expect the market to grow locally so much, but around the world it will grow, yes.
And are there challenges getting a skilled workforce? Is that why you do the STEM outreach?
Yeah, I mean, that's really one of our big challenges. We're really focused on getting a pipeline of talent coming through for us. We obviously are very proud to be sponsoring the STEM Discovery Centre in Stevenage. We have thousands of children arriving each year to not only learn about space and science, but then they can go next door, as you did and saw that the Mars rover in action being tested. And the Mars rover is a very good STEM subject. It's got robotics, it's got AI, it's looking for life, so it's got biochemistry, so it's a really good topic for them to actually see what academic science really looks like in the real world, so it's great.
Fantastic. And and presumably that is focused at a wide age range.
Key stage 2 and 3 for that, and then above that we have our outreach program, our STEM ambassadors, etc. And we recruit about 656 graduates and apprentices last year, so that's really leading to that, and that's really the start of our journey.
Fantastic. We often talk about workforce challenges, skill shortages. Doesn't really matter which inquiry we're talking about, the same topics come up. Are we any worse than France, Germany, other countries around the world? Because we have lowish unemployment, but we don't seem to have the skills that align with the industries that we're trying to promote. So
I think it's the same challenge we're all facing, really. I think as we want to be a science superpower, so do they. Everybody's encouraging STEM. I think the astronomy missions, the Mars missions, those sort of missions are very good vehicles to attract young engineers into the business. So that's really why we push it so hard, because that's the thing that really inspires and captures the imagination. So I think it's a very good vehicle for attracting the talent from other industries.
Okay, thank you. Just before I move on to support for spin-outs and SMEs, just on that, back on that STEM outreach stuff, do you do any research about, as quite a large prime company, about what works and what doesn't? So you said you've got the centre in Stevenage. Did you say Stevenage?
Yes, Stevenage,
yes.
Yeah. Discovery Centre.
Yes.
Yeah.
How much research do you put in to make sure that if you're going to spend a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort in doing something, you want it to make the maximum impact? Who do you work with to get that information?
It's really universities. I mean, we have very strong relationships with 20 plus universities. We have obviously a big graduate apprentice scheme coming through. And the graduates, we recycle those. They're back to universities as STEM ambassadors. So it's about that sort of cycling of knowledge around.
But are you talking to the educators within universities, those who teach primary school teachers, so to make sure that what is actually being delivered will get a 7-year-old excited about astronomy?
It's about, as you see, the syllabus is migrating over time from just pure academic to more targeted industry. And for us, there's a lot of space science now in the curriculum. My niece was building a Mars rover in her school last week. These are the things we want to see more of and encourage more.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. And so, as I said, I was going to move on. So you are a large prime. What work do you do to sort of support the ecosystem around spin-outs and SMEs? Is it you just make yourself or make them aware that you exist, or do you have a more active
I think for space, our role is really to upgrade the SMEs. The SMEs tend to start off in a commercial world. Obviously, the transition from commercial through to aerospace to space is difficult, and we need to help them. We obviously invest R&D with them and have them on the program. But the real challenge, I think, as the previous said, was how do they go from technology to actually being a major player? And that's where we probably need to find other mechanisms to help them. In France and Germany, they have bigger national programs that enable that to happen.
Okay, thank you.
I could just start
yes,
anecdotally, because we had a large contract with Airbus for weather satellites. So something new to me instead of looking up, we're looking down. There's a lot involved in taking on a contract like that, and essentially, I suppose, enlightened self-interest. But Airbus was very supportive in telling us what it was we had to do to fulfil the contract and get all the paperwork right and things, and it was a good experience. It was a good experience in that way, yes. Very good. Thank you both very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. I think, Catherine, you want to come in?
Yeah, briefly, thank you. Just before my colleague Tracy comes in, I'm trying to translate the depth of knowledge that you've got into the average person on the street. So I wondered if both of you could tell me the best thing that you've heard that could be commercialised but hasn't yet. If I start with you, Mr. Byrne.
Well, we are already moving what we do in the astronomy area into other parts of space, the commercial space arena. And if you look at Gaia, for example, it's a 1 billion pixel camera astronomy mission. had enormous amounts of optics technology that we reuse in our commercial space. It has an enormous amount of data processing, big data. I mean, it's generating 2.5 billion pieces of information about the Milky Way. That deep big data analysis is exactly the same techniques that we want to use to look for resources on Earth, track people movements or other things on the Earth. And it's exactly the same as the medical sector want when you're scanning the body to look for illnesses and that. So these are the capabilities. Probably it's not obvious that astronomy develops, but they're there, and they really will be beneficial to the big data world.
That's really heaven. Mr. Woodcraft, what's the best one that we haven't turned into a business yet?
I'd go back to what I was saying earlier. If you could go to the airport and you just walk down a corridor and you've been security screened, it'd make a large difference to a lot of people's lives.
Fair enough. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Catherine. Tracy Crouch.
Mr. Byrne, I was just wondering, do you think that Airbus Defence and Space is adequately supported by access to public funding and private financing to compete for astronomy contracts?
I mean, I think through the European Space Agency we get access to the contracts. It's competitive, so we have to bid and win those. So that's really down to us to make sure we got the right skills and technology. I think we would come back into this sovereign discussion. I think it would be good if the UK government also, when it was doing big asset procurements in space, had more of a sovereign requirement in those, so that some of the technology doesn't go offshore, because we really want to develop more capability, companies, technologies locally, skills and jobs here. So I think that could be looked at. And obviously we have lots and lots of people around the world, the Americans, but also a lot of emerging nations want to work with us on these missions. They're exciting. They generate STEM interest in their countries. So there is a bilateral fund the UK Space Agency has launched. It's still fairly moderate compared to what we would see in other countries, and we could see that would be a good way to expand and build bridges with other countries, but we probably have to be quite strategic about where the countries you want to build those relationships with. I mean, academia and industry, science is a good sort of neutral ground to do that, so that we would look for that as well.
Can you point the committee to any particular country or regency that region does it better than us? What we can learn from it?
I mean, obviously, I managed France and Germany as well. They have the complementary national space program that's equivalent to the ESA program, and that's where all the SMEs, the technology, the capabilities are developed. And then they fly their national missions, they fly bilateral missions with other countries on that. And only when they've upskilled the technology, got through what we were talking about before, then they become competitive and they can bid for the ESA work, the NASA work. That really brings them through that development chain.
A slight recut of Catherine's question, sort of kind of how much importance does Airbus give in terms of translating the technology into other purposes?
I mean, we're a commercial company. I mean, we do astronomy because it develops skills, it develops technologies and capabilities, but we then reuse that for our commercial space business as well, so it's fundamental.
Are you going into the bed bug market?
No, I'm not.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tracy. Mr. Byrne, can I ask you slightly to the side and ask, I believe last month that Airbus purchased a large share of OneWeb.
We procured the manufacturing facilities of OneWeb in Florida. We were a part shareholder of that already, but we procured the complete capability. So yes, we have that now.
And this is maybe something you won't be able to answer, but I'd appreciate your thoughts. In a previous inquiry into UK space sector, we took evidence from OneWeb, and we were talking about the UK's stake in OneWeb. The representatives from OneWeb were assured the committee that it was the intention to build Generation 2 satellites in the UK. Have you any idea whether that is still the intention from OneWeb?
I mean, OneWeb obviously has gone through an asset procurement with Eutelsat and things like that, so the world has moved on. But I mean, the Generation 2 procurement is still being discussed and hasn't been finalised. What we're looking at the moment is whether there will be an opportunity to build maybe the extended Generation 1, because it looks like they'll need more satellites. There's an opportunity to build that in the UK, and the programme the government launched on CLEO is an opportunity for us to look to exploit that. So we're investigating that at the moment.
And you started your comments by saying that Airbus is very interested in Earth observation. Obviously, for a defence company, we can see why that would be the case. Is OneWeb part of that? Is that...
Well, OneWeb is a telecommunications network, but actually we use some of the platform technology that we build in OneWeb in some of our Earth observation missions as well. So actually there's bids into UK military at the moment reusing some of the platform technology that OneWeb developed for surveillance for MOD. So yeah, there's a read across between the sectors.
Thank you. I don't know, Mr. Woodcraft, will you want to come in on that, or are you're just listening? That's fine. That's fine. Okay. Well, thank you both for your contributions today. We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us this morning, and that concludes our second panel. So thank you. And whilst we change over, I will introduce our third panel. We have one witness joining us virtually. So joining us virtually, we have Ian Jones, who's the CEO of Goonhilly Earth Station. So welcome, Mr. Jones. And we have Professor Manesh Anand joining us in person this morning. He is Professor of Planetary Science and Exploration and Deputy Head of the School of Physical Sciences at the Open University. Welcome to both of you this morning. Professor Anand, if I could start with you, please. Can you tell the committee a little about how well established you believe the UK is for analysis of extraterrestrial samples?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. And I see that there is a slight mistake in my name, so I'm sure that I will be corrected. It's Mahesh, not Manesh. So,
apologies for that.
No worries. So to answer your question, in the UK we are actually very lucky to have a very strong community that is world known for its capability for analyzing extraterrestrial materials. And this heritage actually is a result of our involvement since the Apollo era, when we were one of the first few countries that have access to the Apollo samples, and we started our journey then, and we continue on that success till today.
Thank you for that. And so, do you see that future missions in the UK will still have a strong position? I mean, we're talking to start with Apollo. Obviously, we're looking at moon samples, but now we're far more ambitious in the types of samples that we're interested in. Asteroids, meteors, etc. Is the UK still well placed for the spectrum of different samples that will be available?
Sure, I would like to think so. However, there is a serious need to actually maintain that expertise that we have developed. As my previous colleagues were explaining, so I'm here representing a part of the community that comes under the umbrella of planetary science. That is a small bit under astronomy. Now, unlike the majority of astronomy that actually requires telescopes and assets that are in space or somewhere else in part of a telescope, in planetary science, our research actually depends on very modern cutting-edge laboratory instrumentation, which are distributed. So these are distributed across the land because they are developed based on the local know-how and expertise over decades. And therefore is much more challenging to maintain that level of capability that is tensioned against the local, regional, national, and then all sorts of their own strategies to make a coherent use of that to then maintain the leadership at the world stage, which we very much are able to do so. But if we actually don't look into renewing some of those aging facilities, and also investing in many new facilities based on the advancements that have happened, then I think we might not be able to maintain our leadership for very long.
Thank you, and we will come to that in a bit more detail later on in this session, so thank you for that. I'm going to turn to my colleagues, starting with Graham Stringer, who's got a few questions. Thank you, Graham.
Thanks. You say we've got world leadership. Can you just expand on that a little and say where your field stands in comparison internationally? Where are we in the pecking order?
So I speak from my own experience and then perhaps broaden it out. So I'm sitting in front of you because I came here 20 years ago. So I built my career here in the UK, starting with the Natural History Museum and then moving on to the Open University where I am today. And for the last 15 years, I've also been leading the UK community on behalf of 25 higher education institutions, over 150 individuals who are interested in actually doing planetary science, mostly focusing on lunar science. I started a new initiative in 2009 by working together with a NASA institute based out in California. And under the umbrella of that NASA UK node, we have developed a community over the last 15 years, which actually punches well above its weight. So to give you a couple of examples, I mentioned about Apollo samples. So outside the United States, the largest amount of Apollo samples are actually worked on in the UK. So there are 10% of the principal investigators of those Apollo samples who are actually based here in the UK. So that is just one example. Second example is that at the Open University and many other universities in the UK, we have been involved in almost every planetary mission that has actually returned samples to the Earth. So that's from the Stardust to Genesis to most recently Hayabusa 2, OSIRIS-REx, that's the NASA asteroid sample return mission, and many others that actually are in the making. So that way I would say that actually we are very well recognized for our scientific expertise and increasingly so our technical expertise for building miniaturized instruments that can be put on a spacecraft for making measurements either in space in situ.
Thank you. My experience on this committee is we always get very good answers when people are asked to express how well they do things. What areas are we deficient in, and what can we learn from other countries where they may do things better?
Sure. I mean, right at the outset, I said that there are opportunities and there is actually a serious need to look into some of these things. For me, it's people. People are our biggest asset, biggest resource, and we are talking about people who are highly skilled and highly trained. The difficulty is in retaining that talent within the country. Over the past 10 years, I myself have trained many, many PhD students who are now world leaders in their own right, but because they couldn't find stable jobs in the country, they left. And it's the same story across the land, where we actually produce talent, they actually become world leaders, and then we cannot keep them because we cannot provide those long-term stability because everybody, would like to have a stable life. There is something more than science, and we just are not able to do that.
Two questions follow from that immediately. Is that pipeline of people with potential and talent, is that drying up, or are people still coming forward? And why can't we retain those people?
So thankfully, I think I can say that the pipeline is not drying up. and that's actually, I think, really good news. The difficulty is that, and I think you heard in the previous evidence session back in January, that it is the length of time that people have in a given contract. So most of the research is being done in a contractual manner where people tend to have on average 3 years at a place. But in the first year, they get to learn the ropes, and in the third year, they are looking for jobs. And they move from one job to the next job. So after 6 years of doing 2 different jobs in a piecemeal manner, they start to get a bit, edgy, and they start to look for opportunities. So if there are opportunities elsewhere outside of the UK, and the space is a burgeoning sector, it's not just the North America and Europe anymore. China, India, they are growing very fast. So there are lots of opportunities these emerging countries are presenting to our youth and to our trained people, and then they are taking those on. So I think the main issue is how do we actually retain that talent by providing a longer-term stability through funding.
Thanks. Are there any opportunities to use the skills in this sector to exploit other areas of science and technology?
Tremendous. And I'll give you just a few examples. And apologies if I seem too excited, because that's my...
we like excited.
No problem here.
Great. And by chance, if any of you are interested in holding a piece of moon, I brought it for you. But this is what gives us the way in. So the fact that we work on planetary bodies that are easily visible. Sure, everywhere, every time you take evidence in this area, somebody will mention the moon. And we think that we have been to the moon and we know everything about it. But we can't be any more wrong. We are returning to the moon in big time, and you all must have heard about NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services program. Unfortunately, the first 2 missions in that series have not been completely successful. There's one of which didn't quite make it. The other one made it all the way. It's just at the final moment it didn't quite land. So the point here is that many of the developments and innovations that are needed to launch those missions, to make them successful, they are equally applicable. I mean, my colleague Taff Morgan wouldn't be sitting here had it not been the Rosetta mission that he actually worked on that allowed him to develop an instrument for a space application, which later on was turned into so many other applications that you have heard of. The latest example that I have for you is the use of microwave technology, the same microwave that probably most of you have used in your kitchen. So we are actually experimenting with using the same microwave energy for actually processing the material either on the surface of the moon or the surface of Mars to actually extract resources and manipulate material so that actually you can build tools, you can actually build your habitats. If you bring that same technology here in terrestrial case, you could be imagining loads of applications, especially in cases where there is hazard. Imagine suddenly there has been an earthquake. Imagine there has been some natural disaster and you need to rebuild quick, and you need to actually rebuild robotically using new technology. This could have a huge application, right? So I think what we need is to not just to look for outward what we can do in space, but actually use some of those technologies that we are forced to develop because space is a resource-constrained place. And from those learning, we bring them immediately to the Earth for the benefit of the society in the near term.
That's my final question, if I may. I think in your opening remarks, you implied that some of the kits that we currently use is coming to the end of its life. Can you be more specific about what kit needs replenishing and whether there are likely to be the resources there to replace that kit?
Sure. So some of these instruments are very highly specialized, and one of those instruments is called secondary ion mass spectrometry, for example. We have one of those at the Open University. We have another at Edinburgh. Both of these equipments are now more than 15 years old. And in fact, the instrument at the Open University is the one that I used to contribute to the discovery of water on the moon. Now, if you have ever heard about water on the moon, we had a small role to play. And the reason why we could play that small role is because we had access to those Apollo samples and we had access to the latest technology here in the UK. Right? What we need to do now is to actually take that advancement that we have made in the past 10 years in this area to the next level. And there are newer instruments that are actually more capable of doing other things that we would like to do when newer samples are returned. So we need to replace this kind of setup. And it's not just at the OU or Edinburgh, it's at various other universities. So what we need is capital investment. And the capital investment has to be big enough so that a community can come together and bid for the right set of equipment that can be properly distributed across the country, utilizing the local expertise for that type of laboratory analysis. No point in putting an instrument where there is no local expertise. Yeah? And that is really needed, and this takes a few years, so it can't be done overnight. So there needs to be a strategy. We as a community actually came together and submitted a document to the STFC's advisory panel, making a case for that. It was considered. So it has been in there, but I think all I'm doing is highlighting the need that if we don't actually take action, then in a few years' time, we may not be where we are today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Graham. And moving now to Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you very much. If I may, Ian, Mr. Jones, if I could have a couple of questions to you. Good to see you again. Could you just tell us about the role that Goonhilly Earth Station is currently playing in various aspects of space, particularly deep space missions?
Indeed, yes. So Goonhilly was originally built in the 1960s, right at the beginning of the space age. But it's now it was built by the then GPO, which became British Telecom. It's now in private hands, and it's undergone somewhat of a revival in the last few years. We have around 60 different antennas on the site, all pointing at different spacecraft in space, doing various different tasks. So we help to communicate with geostationary satellites, providing communication services. We support low orbiting satellites, providing Earth observation work to the planet. We enhance GPS services, but I guess our great claim to fame is that we are the world's only private company operating a deep space antenna, and it's an old legacy communications antenna that was built 40 years ago. And we've repurposed it. We've changed all the electronics, all of the technical equipment inside. So we are now able to support missions going off to the moon, to Mars, and around the solar system. So that capability we provide to both space agencies and to private companies. And it's really enabled Goonhilly to attract a lot of inward investment into the region and to the UK.
That's brilliant. So in terms of those deep space missions, what are you currently working on? Or is that classified?
No, we work mainly through the European Space Agency at the moment. So our sort of background is to provide services to missions such as Gaia and Mars Express, but also through relationships between space agencies. Every day now we're supporting the Indian Space Agency mission called Aditya L1. It's a science probe that's sitting in a sort of gravity balance between the Earth and the Sun. The front face of Aditya points towards the Sun and does experiments on the Sun. And then during the daytime, it beams that data back to Goonhilly, and we provide that on to Gaia. Just a couple of weeks ago, we helped the Intuitive Machines moon lander to land on the moon, and Goonhilly was the primary ground station for that. And we've supported other NASA missions. We supported the Artemis 1 mission to the moon. We supported the Japanese Space Agency Hayabusa 2 sample return mission, and we helped the Indian Space Agency land their Chandrayaan 3 lander on the moon last year.
Fantastic. Forgive my ignorance. Are you able to do more than one mission at a time? Can you sort of use the antenna different times of the day for different projects?
Very, very occasionally. It's a little bit like looking through an optical telescope. Sometimes it just happens that, say, for example, you're looking at Jupiter through an optical telescope, you might be able to see the moons of Jupiter in the same view. So occasionally, it's possible to have the two spacecraft in one view, but for 99.9% of the time, no, the one dish is dedicated to one mission. When we do the deep space work, though, what happens is that the Earth rotates every day, and so different objects come and go in the sky. So we see the moon rising and setting every day. We see Mars rising and setting every day. So ideally what we need is to have ground stations dotted around the world. The minimum would be 3 ground stations. And then as those missions come and go, we can have antennas pointing at those.
Excellent. And do you have any plans to be the provider of those 3 ground stations?
Absolutely. So last year we expanded our company. We bought facilities in the United States. So we now have capabilities both on the east and west coast of the United States. And we've also been examining expanding into Australia. And that would give us those 3 stations separated by 120 degrees. And that would mean that we can really meet the requirements of the international community, particularly those organisations going back to the moon.
Fantastic. If I may, can I bring you a little bit more sort of back locally? How do you, as Goonhilly Earth Station, work with other parts of the astronomy network, both nationally across the whole country, but perhaps also because there's now a growing space cluster in Cornwall? What role do you play in that?
Yes, well, we work very closely with a number of universities in the astronomy field, and particularly a small group of universities that were involved in really getting the Square Kilometre Array project established in the UK at the same time that we were establishing Goonhilly as a company. And actually that relationship, led by the late Professor Steve Rawlings back in the sort of early 2000s, really helped to get us off the ground, but also it helped to establish the international headquarters of the SKA in Manchester. Now, radio astronomy and the commercial world of satellite communications share a lot of capabilities. We both use antennas, we both use radio communication equipment. We differ in terms of some of the jargon and the language we use, but also some of the techniques that we use. But what we found in working with the radio astronomy community over this last period is that they have techniques that they have developed in radio astronomy that have sort of been long forgotten in the communications world, but we've used those techniques like for example, supercooled receivers, and they make our antennas incredibly sensitive, and that's what's enabled us to compete in the deep space communications world.
Fantastic. Okay. I think that's probably it, Chair, for now.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Tracy Crouch.
Mr. Jones, before I ask my question about local relationships, I just wanted to follow up on your answer to Stephen about your work with the Indian Space Agency. Is that something that is UK government funded via you to then support them?
Actually not, but it does raise some really interesting questions about how the work of international space agencies impacts on industry back in their own countries. So generally speaking, space agencies are there to sponsor and to procure capabilities from their own country. So the Indian Space Agency built their Chandrayaan and Aditya missions from their own industry. Rarely will space agencies buy in technology internationally if they can at all help it. So for companies like Goonhilly to be able to work with the Indian Space Agency, we have to have a bilateral agreement with our home space agency. But in this particular case, our home space agency is the European Space Agency. It was a bilateral between ESA and India. So there is some commercial arrangement that happens between ESA and the Indian Space Agency, and then we are contracted by ESA to provide that service for India. there's I also mentioned that we supported Intuitive Machines for their mission to the moon. That was a private mission funded by Intuitive Machines, but it carried a NASA payload on it. So NASA funded Intuitive Machines to get some payload to the moon's surface. That essentially provided Intuitive with the funding that they needed to carry out their mission. And we had a private arrangement between ourselves and Intuitive Machines. So they were able to procure privately our services. So we're a commercial organisation. We sell those services. We would very much like for the UK to have direct relationships with other nations, and we're in some detailed discussions now with the UK Space Agency about how we can do that and how the UK can have direct bilateral arrangements with other space agencies. And that brings huge benefits. It would bring huge benefits to the UK if we were able to do that. It would mean that we're not then in a competition with other European providers of services, but it would also mean that the UK can essentially do what we in the space industry call barters. So instead of money changing hands between governments, then we agree to swap projects, if you like. So Goonhilly could provide services to, for example, NASA for their future missions, and in return, NASA would fly UK projects into space.
Brilliant, thank you. Before I turn back to my original questions about local relationships, actually, Professor Anand, do you have anything to add to that in terms of that direct relationship and between countries and Asia?
I support what Ian has just said, although there are a few examples where actually UK Space Agency has actually provided support for some bilaterals, especially with NASA and Canadian Space Agency. We also have actually provided some instruments to previous Indian Chandrayaan missions, but again, that went through the ESA route, the European Space Agency route. So I think rather than doing this in a piecemeal bit by bit, I think we need a much broader landscape with a firm backing from our own space agency and say, look, we are going to do this. And when Ian says about bartering, I mean, one day I would also expect that some bartering would be that new samples that will be returned would also be brought back to the UK community to work on them. That could be part of the mix. So, yeah, I support what Ian said.
Perfect, thank you. Mr. Jones, I'm very familiar with Mounts Bay, particularly the other side of the peninsula of Mounts Bay. So completely kind of recognise the challenges of the geography and the transport links and everything else. So when asking you a question about what work you are carrying out with schools and colleges to foster engagement in astronomy, I sort of kind of perhaps appreciate that it may be quite difficult given where you are located. But still, nonetheless, you're a very important part in the sort of kind of space ecosystem in terms of inspiring youngsters into this field. So be really interested to hear how you are sort of kind of gathering that interest in local schools and colleges.
Indeed. Yes, we're right at the very far south tip of the UK on the Lizard Peninsula in Cornwall. And so quite as far away from the bulk of the population of the UK as you could probably get. But having said that, it's a beautiful region and one of the most visited parts of the country, particularly in the summer for tourists. So how do we engage? Well, just last week we as I'm doing now, appearing online. We did an online engagement with almost 200,000 students. It was Mars Day last week, and we worked with the European Space Education Resource Office. It's the UK branch STEM outreach organisation, and beamed images from Mars directly via Goonhilly to 200,000 students. So we're able to do that sort of thing. But we also run what we like to think are very special education outreach engagements. We work with Year 10 students and Year 12 students on summer schools, which really came out of the fact that when we were a very tiny company, we would get lots of students during their work experience week ask us to see if they could have their work experience week with us. We could never tell from one week to the next what we would be doing, so we decided that we would either do make a go of it or do nothing, and we decided that we would invite a lot of students in and give them a space summer school. And I think our experience from doing that for several years now is that it's really a game-changing experience. And I think we use two words. One is inspiration, because Goonhilly has these huge antennas that are communicating, across the solar system to different spacecraft. Very, very inspiring, but also aspiration is the key thing for students to be able to actually see the space industry in action, to see astronomy and space science in action, and realize that they can do it themselves is the thing that actually persuades them to, quite often decide on which A levels to take and which university degrees to go and study. And quite often we've been able to inspire young people to get into the space industry.
And just out of interest, is there a gender difference in interest?
It's interesting that the heritage of Goonhilly is from the satellite communications side of things, and our future really is in what's often termed Space 2.0. It's more of the exploration and using space to help us support life on Earth. So I would say that there's equal interest in the young people. When I travel internationally to conferences, the traditional satellite communications business is populated by people who look like me, with no hair and close to retirement. But the new space, all of the interest in what you can do in space now to look after the planet and to explore the solar system, it's very much a more a young person's industry, and there's a cross section of demographic. It's fantastic to see.
Forgive me. Do you have a visitor centre?
So there was a visitor centre at Goonhilly. The visitor centre building is still in place, but as an SME, as a private company, we have not found the ability to invest in reopening the visitor centre. We've had to concentrate on the very difficult task of becoming an international player in the space communications market. So it's something that we would very much like to get open again, but we don't feel that as a company that's our remit to do. But we would love to find partners to do that with.
Thank you, Professor Anand. Finally, just your own experience of outreach, particularly with younger school-age children. I'd be really interested to hear what it is that you're doing.
Sure. Thank you so much. I mean, this is something that I'm most passionate about, and to the extent that I actually started an outreach program. It's called Living on the Moon, and everybody here can have a sticker there. Why did I call it Living on the Moon is because in 2019, on the eve of the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing, we thought as a community, the entire UK community that I already mentioned, that I coordinate, to come together and put out a set of hands-on engagement activities for anybody, 5-year-olds to 95-year-olds. Really, age is no barrier. And in that process, what you do is that you share the excitement, enthusiasm, and the possibility of developing skills, getting education. So the idea was to engage, enthuse, inspire, right? If we could do that, I think the rest takes care of itself. And the very first thing we did, we went down into London at the Royal Society Summer Science Exhibition. Thankfully, our application was accepted, and we interacted with about 10,000 visitors there. But we realized that London is not the only place, and it's probably more privileged people who get a chance to come there. And being from the Open University, there is no better cause. This is our social mission, to actually get education to as many people as possible. And we have footprints in all 4 nations. So I started actually a tour of all the nations. So went to Wales. I went as a lecturer of Royal Scottish Geographical Society, RSGS. Actually, it's almost 4 years to the day. I remember coming back from that trip and everything else was happening. You would know what I mean. But while I was actually driving across the southern part of Scotland, which is not as visited as some other parts of Scotland, I ended up in a place called Dumfries. Now, a lady came to me at the end of my talk and said, "Did you know that Neil Armstrong had a connection to this area?" Yeah. And to my embarrassment, I didn't. And I said, "Could you please tell me what it is?" And she said, "It's not far from here. It's about 10 or 20 miles from here. There's a place called Langham where the Armstrong clan comes from. Why don't you go and check it out?" So the next day, the very first thing I did was actually go and visit that place. And I still very proudly wear my Armstrong badge of honor here. And once I visited that place, I found that actually lots of tourists, especially from America, were visiting there. But people in my own community, scientists, were unaware of that link. And then and there, I decided I will bring the international lunar community to Scotland in Dumfries. And I wanted to do it the following year, but of course, pandemic and all. But you will be pleased to hear that this June, we will be bringing almost 200 international experts from all over the world, all the way from Hawaii to Australia, come to Dumfries to actually come not just for a scientific meeting, but we have a dedicated school day where we will bring 200 children from the local communities who probably are underserved and don't get much about the space, to bring in there and spend a day with the experts to learn what they can do if they follow STEM. So I think, I can go on, but I can tell you that without the outreach and public engagement and using also the vehicle of the partnership we have with the BBC. You are aware we make programs. We made programs called 8 Days to the Moon and Back in 2019. It got 3 million views. Right? The planets, the universe, got 28 million views. These are actually programs that we make where it's reaching to those parts of the communities who otherwise don't, get a chance to experience this. So I think this is really, really important, and that's why when Graham asked me the question about pipeline, drying, I can emphatically tell you that that is not the case. We have a lot of enthusiasm, right from primary school to secondary school to university. What we need to do is to capture that talent and capitalize on it, and be more inclusive. I have so much discussion I've heard about gender balance, but diversity. We are just starting. It's not just gender balance. There's so much diversity in our community we need to actually, tap into. Right? Well, anyway, I will stop there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tracy. And finally, James Davis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So on to artificial intelligence. And firstly, Professor Anand, what use does Planetary Science make of AI so far?
A huge amount. So we collect a huge amount of data from spacecraft missions which are going around planets. So for example, we have missions that are going around Moon, Mars. There is a mission that is on its way to Mercury. It's been 10 years in the making. So we, as a UK community, are looking forward to that. Once that data comes back, so far, it has been individuals who are sitting in front of their computer, downloading the data and, looking through it, and just the first cut through. Now we are using AI to that effect to actually do the first pass so that they actually identify some of the important and interesting bits so that then a human can pick it up and maximize the output from it. So that's one example. The other use of artificial intelligence in planetary missions is that when these spacecraft are around these bodies, they have to take some autonomous decisions based on the data they collect there. Part of it is what didn't work for the intuitive machine, why it wasn't successful, but this is the development. I mean, this is where things are going. So the future is going to be very much robotics, AI-driven, with human involvement. So that's how I see AI being used.
Really good, thank you very much. And if I turn to Ian Jones, Professor Anna Scaife told the committee that AI was going to be really important in terms of processing and making sense of the large quantities of data that arise through astronomy. Do you think that Britain is well placed to take advantage of that?
I certainly do. The scientific community really understands AI and has this real need to get to the bottom of the useful information, particularly as developed in the radio astronomy community. In order to look back to the beginning of the universe, you need to collect a huge amount of data and process that data. In fact, more data than is currently moving around the world on the global internet. So it's really important to be able to narrow down the required information from that, and I think the UK has a great capability in understanding how that's done. But I think we tend to think of AI as a sort of modern invention. The roots of it go back, I would say, a couple of hundred years ago, and the logic and the mathematics that we use. And in the communications field, we use a similar but related sort of capability. You could determine it, you could call it digital signal processing. And we use digital signal processing for many purposes, to make our mobile phones work, to communicate with satellites. And this works on very narrow amounts of data and processes that data very deterministically, but uses, as I say, the same bedrock of mathematics. And I think in the UK we have the ability to do both of those. So to give you an example, if you were collecting huge amounts of data from the universe and you wanted to determine a process that was going on, to form a galaxy or whatever, AI would be a fantastic tool to use. But if you wanted to do, an international financial transaction, you wanted to, buy something from online from America, you absolutely wouldn't want to use AI. You would want to use digital signal processing and make sure that, that the amount that you put in on the form on the website was the amount of money that was taken from your bank, and you would want absolutely zero chance of there being an error. Currently AI doesn't give us that, but we have other tools, as I say, the digital signal processing that we're really good at in the UK, that can do that. So I think we have the ability to do both.
Okay, and in terms of AI, how are SMEs in this country, such as yours, able to exploit the opportunities?
So I think this is a really interesting point. Obviously, there are the online services that everybody is coming to understand and to use. So that's a process, I think, that we all need to learn about and get better at understanding. I think that's something which will come across the board in terms of companies. But if we look at the technology companies that can really use AI to make a significant difference in the economy in the UK. I think we probably need to do more in terms of the interaction with universities. I think a lot of the development is done in the academic sector at the moment, and yes, it's a real challenge, I think, to see how we can use those how those techniques can be rolled out more broadly across industry. So we will be using AI for example, for surveillance of space and doing a lot of data processing of trying to find out where space debris in space and satellites are in space, processing very large amounts of data and low contrast, low signal to noise data. But we'll also be using very, very much those techniques of digital signal processing as well.
Okay, so you said that the challenges that exist can be overcome in part through better liaison with universities. Are there any other challenges you see or solutions that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I think a lot of the UK money, I would say, is going into the university sector, quite rightly, at the moment. And the Alan Turing Institute and the funding that's going in to create these AI-specific data processing data centers. That's all good, and that should be done. I think what could be done better is having programs which allow particularly technology and manufacturing industries to gain access to the research and development that's being done in universities. We've heard a lot in terms of the evidence here about spin-outs from universities, but that's not the route that all technology companies use to start up. Many graduates leave the university sector, have to work in industry for a few years, and then set up a company. So, activities to really get universities and academia working more closely together is a real challenge. I don't think it's been solved perfectly yet, and we could do more to think about that, how that could be done.
Okay, thank you. Professor Scaife also told us that using AI for astronomy could then lead to AI itself being trained for other purposes. Do you have any comments on the opportunities in that field and whether this country is succeeding?
Radio astronomy is a massively multidisciplinary field. We use the outputs from radio astronomy for our work because the radio astronomers can produce instruments that we can use that are much better quality for receiving very faint signals or for extending the frequencies that of interest that we can use. But then when radio astronomers have received that data, they do image processing. They are often trying to extract very poor information out of very poor quality data. And so that has a massive amount of impact. We've already heard a number of witnesses talk about the implications to the medical field, and very often the capabilities, particularly around processing of data, and that includes AI, becomes used in the medical field. So yes, there's many opportunities for the skill set developed in the astronomy community to move across to other sectors.
Fantastic, thank you. I think the bell is about to ring for Wales questions.
It certainly is. So thank you, James, for that. And can I thank our two witnesses, Ian Jones, thank you for joining us virtually, and Professor Manesh Anand. Apologies for getting your name wrong at the start, but thank you very much for joining us. And I think several of the committee members want to see your moon rock at the end, so Thank you. That ends today's session. Order.
Ended. The proceeding has 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 ended.